What we call a civil war was never a war, and it certainly wasn't civil. There was no declaration of war, there was no treaty of peace. It was actually a mercenary war. Now, how could that happen? Well, you remember the Confederation of States from 1781. They were a business enterprise on behalf of each state, and it's known by the terminology state of. State of New York, state of Virginia, state of Oregon. Well, what's the other ones? Well, there's just Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, Oregon. And then there's the Federation. That's Virginia State, Oregon State, Massachusetts State, and then the business enterprise, state of, state of, state of. So the verbiage tells you what you're looking at. And it was the state of that went to war with each other. Now, they'd been at each other's throats over this economy that had been in place since the colony period. The British set up this slaves economy. And my family was up to their ears in it. We were slavers. The Graves family coming out of Jamestown, Culpeper County, Virginia, up and down the whole eastern seaboard. And my own three greats-grandfather had slaves in the lower part of Missouri, below the compromise line. And by the time he came out here on the wagon train, he was sick to death of the whole dang thing. He gave them all free papers. He divided up everything of value, even the what we call tack out in the barns for his own clothing. I got his will. And then they walked, and everybody walked, all the way from Independence, Missouri, to what became Oregon City, and then went out into the Yamhill district and struck a claim. That process, this business of walking across the country to get away from something, kind of tells you a little bit about what was going on behind him. The storm clouds had been 30 years in the making. Britain had decided that they were going to attack us militarily again. And they had this scheme. The problem they were facing wasn't anything to do with slavery at all. It was the cotton prices. The Industrial Revolution was gaining a lot of speed. Steam engines now were driving these looms. Before that, there were hand looms. Maybe at best a water-powered loom. But now they had steam engines, and textile was the gold rush of the centuries. They needed the raw material. They needed the southern cotton. And the South knew that. Georgia particularly had some really good contracts with England, and France was involved in it. So England and France were very interested in having inexpensive raw material coming out of the southern cotton fields. England didn't like the fact that the southern cotton wasn't cheap. They knew they had a corner on the market, and the price was high, and they were making extreme wealth down there. England decided to put a little competition in the marketplace. So they started cotton plantations in Egypt. Egyptian cotton was very high quality. They made cotton plantations in India. That drove the price down, and everybody was happy for a while. Then there was an agricultural accident of some kind. Something hit the agriculture of both cotton plantations in the Middle East, and they had no cotton for 7 years. I guess the South decided to take advantage of it. They ran the price to the moon. It was like OPEC in the oil industry, and that made everybody mad. France and England got together and decided, we got to get this done with. So they planned this war, the one we call a civil war. They planned it. We would never have known a thing about it. But California was already now a sovereign nation state. Oregon was knocking on the door. They had to have somebody take the West Coast out, because they were going to take this whole republic down and remove it completely. Well, Russia was invited to the party to take the West Coast. Alexander II of Russia was fairly new at being a czar over there, and he looked this thing over and decided not to play. He's the one that blew the whistle on the whole thing. And a couple of couriers got caught in a blockade, and the battle plans came to the attention of Lincoln's cabinet. It appears that Lincoln knew all about it all along, but the cabinet didn't. They were hysterical. They came to him and said, "Look what's happening here. They're going to attack us. We need to declare war on 2 more countries." And he says, "No, just one. One war at a time." And everything he did in the first part of his office put us more and more into war. The first thing was he was a bar attorney, so he wasn't really eligible to be the president of the republic at all. So he was CEO of one of the working corporations that we call federal government. Then he called Congress together and made them swear an allegiance to these corporations as their senior. So he corporatized Congress. Well, when the South sees us coming, they're raising their hands and screaming bloody murder, foul ball. He wouldn't listen. Newspapers all over the North began to publish that this was something funny going on, and so he just shut them down. He broke up 300 printing presses. He rounded up at least 12,000 people that were trying to tell people what was going on. One of them was the Attorney General of one of the nation states, and put him in a military prison without any charges, just to shut him up. Historians say there was more like 20,000 people. He suspended habeas corpus and just used goon squads to do this from the militia army. He then renamed what the Confederation of States in the North were to the Grand Army of the Republic. And then he went through a number of generals trying to get anybody to attack the South. And a lot of them wouldn't. McClellan, who actually trained his army, refused to do it. He would fight defensively, but he wouldn't attack. He would not pursue the enemy into the Southland and wage war. But eventually he found 3 homicidal maniacs to take up the job. Grant and Sherman and Sheridan were 3 real prize cookies. And so they had this mercenary conflict that simply broke the country. It destroyed the South, and it flat out broke the North. By 1863, it looks like Lincoln realized he'd been used. After the war was over with, a journalist interviewed Alexander II of Russia and asked him what it was about the new republic that he was so concerned about them that he came to their rescue in their hour of need. Because that was 1863, after Gettysburg. He said, "I wasn't enamored with the new republic at all. It wasn't about that. It was about cotton. France and England were enjoying this industrial revolution in cotton making textile. We were an agrarian society. We were not part of the industrial revolution at all. If France and England got their hands on that cotton, they would race ahead of us economically, and we would never catch up. It would not be good for my people." He sent his entire Russian fleet to our shores to protect us from France and England. They operated out of Manhattan and San Francisco. Mary Todd had lunch on one of the vessels. It's all a record. Well, France and England didn't attack. But we broke ourselves anyway. And constitutions are contracts. Remember, the Pope owns all of North and South America, at least in his own mind. So we have a contract to deal with the Pope through the Lord Mayor of London, which is the Crown of England. And then the monarchy, of course, claimed all the Western. They had people out here before our wagon trains ever got here. So we have a contract with them through the Territorial Corporation of the government. And now we're broke. Lincoln went to Gettysburg early in 1863, and he was physically shaken. They said they thought he had the flu. He was physically ill. They could see it. Mr. French, the historian for Congress, was standing at his elbow during the Gettysburg address, and he remarked that the president looked completely overwrought. Something about Gettysburg shook him. and he realized he'd been used, and there was great damage to civilian populations here. A couple of months later, he gave the first executive order known as General Order 100. It became the basis of the Hague Convention today. It's about 150 some articles, and it talks about the responsibilities of any army, including ours, with respect to civilian casualties and civilians in the way of war. It has two curious articles in there, though. It says the Army is responsible for protecting the people. People. Now, Lincoln, of course, was the one that coined the word person to replace people, because person legally means corporation, an incorporated entity. People don't know that. They should be learning that in school before they're out of the 6th grade, but nope, not a peep. People and persons are not the same thing. People are alive. Persons are a legal fiction. And it says people in that General Order 100. It also says they should protect the money. Interesting. Today the Army's been collecting and protecting the money ever since then. There's about $27 trillion in a slush fund being managed by the DOD right now today. 21 trillion of that belong to Americans. Problem with that is there are no Americans left here in their minds, because everybody was turned into a British Commonwealth subject without their knowledge, without their consent, all behind their back. Secrecy. How could that happen? Lincoln bankrupted both corporations the very next day after the General Order 100 was issued. So April 25th of 1863, we had a bankrupted government. The municipal was down, the territorial was down. There's no way out. Nobody was reconstructing anything, and the Pope came in to the municipal corporation and reorganized it, spelled the words a little differently, and took ownership. The monarchy came in, that would be Victoria, and they took over the territorial corporation, and they reworked it, rewrote it, changed a few of the lettering, and took command of the territorial corporation. The Federation of States was never at war. The states themselves, the independent nations, they were never at war. It was the Confederation, the business fronts, that were at war. They were destroyed. They're gone. They were never reconstructed. Then they got around to making perhaps an upside-down nation. Before, the people in their assemblies were overlooking all government activity, and the Continental Congress was a result of that. The constituents would send them to Congress. And now, all of a sudden, we have a completely different operation. We have the state of state, what were the Confederation originally, the state of state governments of the states are franchises of the federal government, which is an incorporated government. So by making everything incorporated, the states become subordinate to the federal government. Lincoln did that. And then he was assassinated. Johnson tried to reform everything, but the Republican Congress, the hawks there, didn't want that to happen. They never wanted the South to ever come back in as a state again. He resisted them. They tried to impeach him, and they almost did, but not quite. Grant then was told, his handlers, I don't think he was smart enough to know anything, he was told that there was a big problem. The community of nations does not allow a government to overlay another government's land. Remember, the District of Columbia was sitting on Virginia and Maryland land. And now the Pope owns it, and it's a separate nation under his ownership. He owns Washington, D.C. He still does now. They had to do something about that. So Grant was given the job of getting the District of Columbia cut out of the perimeter of our nation. He tried to do it in 71, didn't quite work. But by piecemealing it, he got it done by 1878. The District of Columbia, reduced in size to a square mile, became the property of Puerto Rico under Spanish Inquisition law. It's not part of the United States, and it hasn't been since 1878. When I was a child, nobody in Washington, D.C. could vote. I didn't know why. They just said they knew too much of the action. No, they were on a different nation altogether. But they were forced to do that. You can't have the Pope having a nation sitting on top of Virginia. That's a nation. Or Maryland. That's another nation. Internationally illegal, unlawful. So we have a nation that's broken, and the Reconstruction never took place. We have foreign powers owning our government, and then we have an election process through these county of county, state of state franchises to produce officers for this incorporated Congress that's supposed to be doing all this business for our benefit. And of course, they're not doing anything for our benefit. They're taking everything offshore. You're sovereigns, and your state nation is a sovereign nation state. But you have to come back to the soil and be what you're born to be. And the only way you can do that is to join your state assembly. You've got to get involved. You can't sit on the couch and watch TV and reruns of Lassie. You've got to get off the couch and get busy. And we have a roadmap. The founders gave us a beautiful blueprint. How to run a nation by investing in your own state, by people. And that's what we're up to today. We have a job to do. We have all our courts are foreign courts. You're a living man, a living woman, but under their law, you're a person. They incorporated you at birth. Within days of being born, you were turned into a corporation. You see, the doctor did a record of birth, as usual, gives you the weight of the baby and the time and the date, and your mother, not knowing anything about this, signed it over to the vital statistics, which turned you into a certificate of birth. That is a completely different document. That's foreign ownership. Your mother gave you away. Totally ignorant of it. She knew nothing about this. They didn't tell her a thing. So now you're incorporated. Well, the value in that to the courts is that a court is a sea law court today. Ever since Lincoln, it's all been sea law courts. And sea law courts can only deal with incorporated bodies. So you go into a sea law court because you're an incorporated body. And they trick you into agreeing to it, and that makes it lawful. One of the first things they generally do is give you some kind of a paper, and there'll be a box on there, are you a U.S. citizen? Of course I am, you know. Bingo! Just became a Brit. Or the judge will say, well, aren't you a U.S. citizen? Well, of course I am. Bingo! You're a Brit. You're agreeing to be something other than an American. A U.S. citizen is a member of the corporate government owned offshore. When they started out, one of them was, I think, declared in Edinburgh, Scotland. And they took command of a whole lot of ranch land in Montana. And they had all these women were running these giant livestock barons. And I always wondered how come these people had all this land and all this cattle and great big cattle companies. And then you find out they're all owned by the Bank of Glasgow. Or where did that come from? Well, it's because they claim ownership of the western United States. And we're just sitting on it. So you buy a piece of property, and you don't really buy it at all. Your title of occupancy gives you the joy of renting, thinking you're owning, because it's taxed all the time, every day. And you pay it every year. And the money goes offshore. And you think you're paying for schools and bridges and roads, and no. Maybe 10% of it stays behind, the rest goes away. What a game. Then they made bonds in your name by you accessing your credit, because as a birth to death person, as a corporate person, you have a certain value. And by taking that corporation and accessing the credit, they make a bond. One bond is identified by all three of your names in capital letters. And when they capitalize anything in your name, that means a corporation. If they capitalize all the names in a government, it's a corporation. If they capitalize a business, it's a corporation. Corporations are always capitalized. Ships at sea during the Phoenician period always capitalized the names of their vessels. Everything is referred to as a vessel. Well, you got to fix that, because the founders gave us something else. In our Constitution, it clearly says we are under common law. We have admiralty law on the high sea. We have surety law, incorporated contract law. But you, the sovereigns of this nation-state country, no. You have common law. What in the world is common law? Well, every nation has common law, but what's ours? Ours is American common law, known as public law. Do we haven't have any operating courts right now? I haven't seen any in my lifetime. I certainly know there was none in my father's lifetime. The sea law courts pretend to do common law stuff, but they're not really doing it. They have a judge. And the courtroom is a battleground, just like the Mediterranean, where you have the prosecutor over here and the defense over there, and they're arguing, and you're watching a battle take place. Nothing's changed. The founders gave us another model. The jury runs the court. There's no judge involved. There's a justice to make sure the courtroom runs sanely and properly, and you have your bailiff, and you have your recording person and all that. It's a legitimate court, but the jury does the questioning. The jury decides what kind of offense there is. The jury decides even if there's a crime. There must be a victim in order to be a crime. You can't break a rule and become a felon. Not in the common law world. Only in the sea law world. So, we have a grand jury and a court operating side by side. And every state has its own constitution, which is its contract, that puts it in the Union Trust. And the assembly of unincorporated people who now are Americans by declaring themselves so in proper form in the public domain, about 11 pages of documents necessary, to reclaim your status as American. And to refuse to accept the fact that you've been hijacked. And your bond name, all three names, all in capital letters, that's out there being circulated around and bought and sold like mortgage-backed securities. And then your name with only the middle initial, that's a transmitting utility corporation located in Puerto Rico. And it's running around all over the world, generating great deals of money, buying and selling that you know nothing about. And then there's just the first name and the last name, all in capital letters, and that's a trust owned by, like you're a dependent on the state, receiving welfare. And that's running all over the state. And all these bonds are insured, so when you die, you're worth more dead than alive. So you can see the value of killing lots of people. Makes sense. One of my people that I recently did her documents for her had been aware of this and did a research on her name, and a few years ago she was worth some $10 million. Last year she was worth $1 billion. $1 billion. And of course she's living a very conservative life, no money like that in her pocket. The way out of this is to reconstruct our government. The part that was damaged during this mercenary war, the northern aggression over the South, the destruction of the country, we have to rebuild the whole thing. And the first thing to do, know yourself to be an unincorporated living man, an unincorporated living woman. And then you have to create documents that you are not a U.S. citizen. You are not a citizen of the United States of America Incorporated. Those are British terms. You just didn't know it. And that you, in fact, take ownership of every kind of derivative name that's ever been applied to you, every way it's been spelled, every way it's been used, every nickname, everything you can think of that identifies you is on those documents, and you copyright that. That's in a document in the public domain. You receive documents to carry with you on your person in the form of a credential card, not a driver's license. It says you're a corporation, or a social security card that says you're a corporation. And you learn not to admit to being a corporation accidentally. You learn how the language has been mealy-mouthed around so that words mean dual things. And the judge sees it one way, you think it's another way, and he's laughing. Yeah. They access your credit that you didn't even know you had and take 60 grand out of your account. And you just won a case in court for $200. Who do you think's laughing in the back room? The schmuck in front who thinks he won something. That's what's going on. It's a criminal empire. And it goes all the way to the top in almost every nation of the planet. Big. So, don't stand for it anymore. You're born here, or you're naturalized here, then say so. Contact your local assembly. Let a recording secretary, international notary witness, prepare your papers, file them. We don't file. We record them in the public domain. They become law. They're accessible by anybody, especially a law officer or a judge. You become a jurisdiction of land and soil. You're not jurisdiction of sea. If you don't do anything, you're going to be under the jurisdiction of sea, and every court can grab you. But if you fix your paperwork properly, you're out of their jurisdiction. You can't imagine how much it costs them by their own rules if they cross that jurisdictional line and arrest you, harass you, incarcerate you, or anything. I looked at the list. It comes out of the UCC. Oh my gosh. If a law officer inadvertently arrests you, an American national, and throws you into a jail, that county government is hit with a bill, or could be hit with a bill, of $1.6 million per person per day. It's that heavy. If a judge drags you into a courtroom and doesn't listen to the fact that you're outside of his jurisdiction, it's like $250,000 fine per incident, loss of his job and his bar membership. This is serious stuff. We didn't make these rules up. They made their own rules up. Get out of their jurisdiction. Become an American again on the land and soil of your respective state. You can be born in one. It'll always be your birth state. You can be domiciled in another state. That could be your present state. But you have to do it. You have to actually do it. People are ready and willing to help you. There's money actually waiting for you. The assemblies are being constructed right now. Yesterday I was in a budget meeting for Oregon. We are expecting to be able to put our government together very shortly. Money is coming. Our government is in its bankruptcy right now, the fourth time. The fourth time. We bankrupted in 1863, 1907, 33, and then Obama bankrupted us in 2015 or 16, forced into it, and the territorial government was left in Chapter 11. So it didn't have to go down all the way, and it's being reconstructed right now. There's a lot of disruption. Donald Trump is an elected president of the corporate government that isn't there anymore. You can imagine the dilemma there. So he has to be commander-in-chief of the armed services, but he only controls the Army because the naval services have always been under the Queen. How many sailors? I was a Marine. How many naval officers even knew that? Admirals did. They refused to take orders, and so Mr. Trump had to go see the Queen. We had to declare a decree over mandate, pointing out the fact that we now own our own Navy, not just in port like we always did, but on the high seas as well. We have some house cleaning to do. So I invite you to join me, join the Assembly. I'm the coordinator of the Oregon Assembly. There's 2 of us. I wish there were 6 of us. A lot of people coming back to the land and soil rapidly. Property taxes are illegal. Oregon hasn't given you a P&L ever. It's worth a lot of money. Oregon has a lot of money. Washington has 3 times as much money. But you're given a zero-based budget to make you think we're broke all the time. It's a con game. You should be getting a check at the end of each month instead of a tax bill at the end of the year. No, we have tens of billions of dollars invested. The state's not broke at all. They've been skimming off money and pigeonholing it, managing it offshore, hiding the fact that they're doing this. The sheriffs have to be put back in their saddle because they are the highest level of law enforcement, of public service, of peace officer that there is. They stand right next to the state constitution defending it directly. And at their hip is the Assembly, unincorporated, directly under the Constitution. State of Oregon, right from the beginning, using that verbiage, was unincorporated, but somewhere along the line, very shortly, it became an incorporated state-of-state government. The legislature in Salem, they're a service company providing services, enumerated services, for you, the people. And they don't even know it. They think they really are the government. They're incorporated. They're a franchise of a bankrupted government. Kate Brown is not the leader of anything. She is the CEO of that corporation. And she's trying to act as though she has the right to make law. Everything's wrong with this picture. Treason from one end to the other, corruption from one end to the other, and the only people that can fix it are the living men and living women on the land and soil of Oregon. We are the government. Belcher gave us the right to do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's get this mess cleaned up. Bring your mop bucket. Bring your mop. Let's clean house. I'm Bobby Graves. Thank you.